Okay. Any questions or any comments at this stage before we move to the next section of the presentation? I think we got a little.
Can you please go to the earlier slide? Actually, we
Sure.
did not, I mean, I didn't understand how we came to the next one. Okay.
This one?
Yeah. So we are
Okay. So
discussing this. No.
we've just completed this. Let me explain this slide to you once again. So
Okay.
the IR framework, which is the Integrated Reporting Framework, and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is also known as the SASB. So the two of them have actually joined hands to form something known as the Value Reporting Foundation, right? So what this Value Reporting Foundation is supposed to do, as you know, the IR is a reporting guidelines, or it has a certain set of structures where organizations are supposed to present on the six capitals, the value creation paradigm, the business model, and so on. So IR had a certain framework, and SASB was more like a GRI, where there were different sets of targets and indicators. What the Value Reporting Foundation will do is it will amalgamate the key takeaways from IR and SASB and create a very comprehensive framework on its own. So if someone tomorrow, so this Value Reporting Foundation framework is not yet out. This happened, I think, somewhere late 2020, and the council is now working on creation of this framework. But later on, what will happen is when the Value Reporting Foundation is out, if an organization is adhering to the Value Reporting Foundation for their annual disclosure, they can very conveniently say that we have ticked off both IR as well as SASB box in this reporting format itself, because we have taken the best of both of them through the framework that VRF is going to suggest. So that's what this slide is all about. Clear?
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right. Now we are going to move into, so we've seen the context, we've heard a little bit about what's been happening, what the history looks like, what the past looks. Yes. Do I hear a question? Okay. So what the past looks like, what the present looks like, what is it that we need to do in the future? We've seen a little speck of the different points of time what ESG would really look like. Now let's delve a little deep into the sector that I'm representing here and talk a little bit around the type of opportunities that exist in this sector on ESG reporting. So we'll talk about the value propositions actually for ESG reporting for the manufacturing sector. Now, before we get there, just a little, a little fact sheet about the sector for you. So if you look at India's manufacturing sector, this is the data that I got from the web. It contributes to about 17, a little more than 17% to the overall GDP of the country. If I look at the emissions contribution, it's about a quarter of the total emissions. So India is one of the highest emitters, and it's the fourth largest emitter. A quarter of those emissions are actually contributed by the manufacturing sector overall. Now, if I compare this canvas to the global canvas, the GDP contribution of manufacturing overall as a sector roughly is between. Am I audible? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, is Professor Singh, is someone trying to ask a question? I actually can't see everyone, so not sure if
No, ma'am.
there was a question coming in.
Mic has been on.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right, no problem. All right, so GDP contribution globally is also around the same, very, very similar to India. And very surprisingly and coincidentally, I would say, even the contribution of emissions globally from the manufacturing sector is about a quarter. So just a food for thought for you to remember that while manufacturing is possibly, there's another data point that says that 1 out of every 10 jobs that are being created in India is in the manufacturing sector. So, from an employment standpoint, from an overall contribution to the GDP, from an economic sustainability standpoint, it's a very, very important sector. And India is absolutely a mirror image of what is happening at a global scale. However, from an emission standpoint as well, given the size of the sector and the different types of subsectors, there are about 10 to 11 types of subsectors that manufacturing alone has. The contribution is also very, very high. So, how you manage these two things in your disclosure when you're reporting as a manufacturing sector company is very, very important. So, do keep this stat in mind. Again, this slide may not be visible, but one document that I would definitely, if you've not seen this before, the standard, the standards and poor, S&P Global, they come up with something known as the ESG Risk Atlas, where they look at the ESG risks of companies, of sectors, as well as of regions and geographies. So this is one image that I pulled out from there. It's a very recent one, actually. This light blue and dark blue are different environmental and social risks. Now, if I look at this sectoral risk atlas, basically, I won't find manufacturing as a single sector. But all these little green ticks that I've actually put on the side, these are all different subsectors that together form the manufacturing sector. So, what I'm trying to explain to you is manufacturing as a whole cannot be seen as okay, this is one sector, these are what the risks look like, this would be what the mitigation strategy looks like. No, the risk appetites of the sector overall and the subsectors are at different levels of maturity. So one size fits all approach will just not do for this sector. If you have to understand ESG reporting, you first have to understand what are the ESG risks that are affecting the subsector that you represent. I've put a link to this particular tool. It's a very, very useful tool, especially for corporates, for anyone actually, if you want to understand at a sectoral level what ESG risks look like. So when I send you the presentation, please do take a look at it. And you will see that, for example, if I'm talking about Marico as an organization which is in the consumer product space, our overall environmental and social risks are possibly not as high if I were a technology, hardware, or a semiconductor manufacturing company. So, whatever risk mitigation approach, even being a part of the larger manufacturing sector, my risk mitigation strategy would be very, very different to what a technology hardware company would come up with, right? So, understanding this as the first, like the step zero of your reporting journey, I think is very important. Secondly, for the manufacturing sector overall, whichever green tick you're a part of, there are three important areas. These are the strengths as well as the weaknesses. So, number one is visibility. Given the vast nature of the organization, especially the size of the value chain, there are possibly 5 to 6 tiers of supply chain who are working with you. And if you're a global company, that is around the world, having visibility of your environmental and social risks over a short, medium, and long term is very, very important. And sometimes it gets practically impossible to be able to have that kind of data. But that's the challenge that you'll have to realize and then create a way of working around it. Secondly, traceability. Where is your material coming from? You must have heard about strategies being used, especially by, say, a food processing company called farm to fork strategy. Finally, what you have on your plate or what you're serving to your consumers as the end product, do you even know from which farm and from what kind of environmental and social conditions has that product come from? So, are you able to trace your materials right from the fork to the farm? What kind of strategies you have? What kind of biodiversity controls have you set up if you are sourcing it from let's say, a forest, right? So, traceability is another very, very important area, very difficult area, to work with, but important from a reporting standpoint. And then data and analytics. If you look at a typical company sustainability report or even an integrated report, you would see volumes of qualitative data, right? I will talk about different types of disclosures slightly later in the presentation, but just very important to state over here that while you can keep on writing stories on data on what your organization has done, practically as an investor, or say if I'm a CRISIL or an MSCI or a Sustain Analytics who is a rating agency, if I'm a data analyst, that qualitative data is just noise to me. I will not be able to do anything with it. So the moment we move from qualitative disclosures to data-driven analytical disclosures, that's where you started playing the game correctly. And that is definitely a challenge sometimes, but your success mantra lies over there. If you can move from qualitative reporting to quantitative reporting, have credible, authentic data to talk about, that's where investors sit back and start hearing about your ESG stories. So these are some of the key challenges to note. I'm going to skip this slide, but then you will find this slide to be very useful when you're looking back at this presentation. These are again just some data points and links to some excellent quality market insights that I've picked up from you. These are insights by Verdantix, by McKinsey, by Deloitte on some surveys that they have undertaken and how they are seeing a radical shift in how ESG policy is being driven, how strategic choices are being made, how companies are allocating budgets on overall ESG strategy and actions and so on. So suggestion would be to please go through some of these and understand, or rather read through the reports and understand what the samples are looking, what these surveys are talking about. I just have a very quick summary for you over here. So if I have to read through all those reports and if I summarize what the sectoral enablers are, so the evolving regulatory landscape is definitely an enabler. It is driving manufacturing companies to get better at ESG reporting. Access to capital and tech enables productivity gains. The industry 4.0 and I think technology overall has created a disruptive change in how manufacturing is being done. Smart manufacturing is really paving to be a new revenue stream for many companies, and hence it is opening up avenues for better access to capital. And that is again being looped into how a ESG report is being written. So access to capital and smart manufacturing for improving productivity is definitely another enabler. Stakeholder capitalism. It is not just investors who are reading your reports. You have rating agencies, you have definitely have your investors, you have customers. I can tell you our own story at Marico. I have had customers who've written to us saying, we've been, a consumer for the parachute coconut oil for 20 years. Can you tell us what is it that you're doing on sustainability? And we have little excerpts of our integrated report, which we share specifically with the consumer for them to understand how we are, working around consumer centricity and how we are hearing the voices of our consumers when we are innovating our products. That's stakeholder capitalism. And that is, again, changing the way ESG reports were being conceptualized. Smart manufacturing techniques to drive future competitiveness. Your future lies where technology lies, right? I don't think there's anyone here in this room who will debate with me on that topic. So smart manufacturing techniques, and how can you use digitalization, really as that bedrock to drive competitiveness, again, is becoming a key thing that you can report in your disclosures. Social license to operate, not just consumers, but even communities. Is it just philanthropy that you're doing in your CSR, or is it a strategic CSR where, your brand, if you're calling your brand a sustainable brand, Is it going beyond just doing a responsible marketing campaign? And is it actually looking at social value creation? Right. So these are some of the things that you need to report in your annual disclosures. Attraction and retention of future workforce. I mean, the Gen Zs and the millennials of the world don't care how beautiful the glass building is. Rather, they care how will they spend the 8 hours, and whether in those 8 hours of their daily work is there anything impactful at all that they could do. So, how can you create an overall ESG led culture to be able to attract and retain the future workforce is also very, very important. And then product innovation. Sustainability is really becoming, and this is again something that I'm seeing at Marico itself, how a sustainability related performance of a product across its life cycle is driving innovation, is driving investments towards product transformation. So that again is a huge sectoral enabler for the manufacturing sector. You move away from just talking about the organizational initiatives and you focus more on product related initiatives. Talk about the sustainable impact of product at each stage of the life cycle, and not just environmental impact, but social impacts of your product as well, right? So these are some of the key sectoral enablers that all those reports talk about. Now, ESG ratings for that matter, ESG ratings are related to risk performance of risk management of an organization. If you have a high score as an investor, the investor knows that a higher score is actually an indication of better risk management and conversion of some of those risks to opportunities by the companies, right? So we've moved away from just financial contracts to now what this word is really becoming a catchword these days. It's a social contract, right? You don't just sign a contract with investors or between companies, but in that you also sign a contract with your society. So if your company is not able to meet your suppliers, your customers, your investors, your regulators, everyone's interest, then you're failing as an organization in serving the social contract. So that's why very, very important that you focus on what ESG ratings are all about and how can you focus more on the risk management part of it in your disclosure. So this is a little diagram or a little hack that I use myself when I have to talk about, value propositions of ESG reporting. What are the absolute must-haves, right? And this is again created from a manufacturing sector perspective. First things first, do you have actionable data and insights that meets the need of each type of stakeholder? So number one, create a stakeholder expectation diagram or do a stakeholder needs analysis. Understand which are the fulfilled needs and which are the unmet needs, right? So the needs that you're meeting as a company, the needs that are still unmet. And based on that, you basically try to collate data which directly addresses the met and the unmet needs of all your stakeholders. That's step one. Step two is address the material business risks across your value chain. So as a manufacturing sector, I talked about this even earlier. Visibility of the different material risks across the value chain is a very difficult area to work on, but it is important that you prioritize what risks are material to your business, right? And then you create your mitigation strategies and you disclose about them in certain way that at least your topmost risks which are material to your business from a value chain standpoint are being addressed. Create value driven opportunities. So talk about the future. How are you using a certain type of risk to create an opportunity for yourself in the future? I'll give you an example again over here. Like at Marico, we've started talking about something called product sustainability index. So what is it that we're doing in a product sustainability index? Basically, we are trying to create a tool by which we can give a score. Okay. Again, when I say a score, it's going to have an environment component, social component, a governance component. Every product, whether it's a parachute coconut oil or a Saffola edible oil, will have an environment score, a social score, and a governance score. And based on that score, once that scoring has been done for the product, when the budgeting cycle is happening next time on the resourcing for that product, or you know revisiting the configuration of the product, it is that sustainability score which is going to influence, or which will be leveraged by the decision makers and the organization to go for product transformation. So that is meeting the needs of the future. We know that consumers, we spoke about it, right? That consumers are willing to pay an extra price provided you tell them why is your product sustainable. So for you to tell them why your product is sustainable, you actually have to make the product sustainable. And in order to do that, you need some kind of a data to, chew upon, to be able to, like change the algorithm, change the configuration of your product. And that is what is known as value driven opportunity. So you need to write about this. You need to keep your stakeholders informed that you are trying to walk on these different paths. Lead with impact. Somewhere your report should not just be about yourself. I think this everyone would have, whoever has spoken to you so far would have talked about. Your report needs to have something called impact leadership. Earlier, we would talk about thought leadership. Now we're talking about impact leadership here. So if I'm a supplier to an organization, and if I'm reading a report, I should be impacted, positively influenced by the kind of changes that have been driven by that corporate within the industry itself, right? How has it taken the stakeholders ahead with it in its entire ESG journey? That needs to come out in a report. And then finally, it's actually ironical over here. ESG sometimes gets replaced with something that I call as EHG. That's eyewash, hogwash, and greenwash. And this is a problem that we've seen a lot, specifically in the pre-pandemic era. I will not name a certain report, because I think all reports have this EHG part of it somewhere, deeply embedded in the ESG reporting. But it is important that we move away from EHG, come up with transparent data. The data may not be rosy, that's absolutely fine. But credible data, authentic data, and data that can be measured. Very, very important. So these are the 5 very simple, very simplistic value propositions of ESG reporting that really matter to the manufacturing sector. And again, a little hack that I think is useful for anyone, whether you are on the reporting side of it, you're part of an organization, or you're an investor. What kind of questions do you need to ask yourself before you start your reporting journey? One, have you captured the market signals enough to be able to, add things in your report which are futuristic in nature, which are not defensive, but rather which are disruptive in nature. And whether it's not just about reporting, right? It's about what kind of strategies do you adopt as an organization. What if you have a 30-minute discussion with your CEO tomorrow? What are the 10 things that you would like to influence and sell him to, right? On ESG. So it's very, very important that you cut out all the noise and only focus on the market signals before you even start your reporting journey. Then this is a SWOT in the middle, but I actually do a SWOT ulta. I first look at the threat. So the threat is, you need to ask yourself, as an organization, is your goal to only reduce or avoid regulatory notices or messages from activists? Is that what you're focusing on? Then that's a threat. And if your reporting structure is on this, then you need to move away. Opportunity is your goal to develop a strategy where you're only able to access larger market opportunities. Are you only trying to have a long-term strategy to pursue growth? Definitely it's an opportunity, but it's very long-term. You need some short-term successes, some quick wins as well. So think about it. Weaknesses, are you only trying to access green capital, right? And your narrative in your report is only aligned towards how can you access green capital? That's a weakness. while anyone would say that that's a strength, but if you look at the problem in its entirety, if you're only focusing on the capital part of it, then you're losing out on a lot of the juice. So you cannot only think of writing stuff in your report that is only meant for shareholders. You cannot augment the shareholders' interests only. You have to think about your stakeholders. So where is the strength of your report? That is where you are aiming at pursuing higher ESG goals because it's the right thing to do for your employees, for your consumers, for the communities, and for the world as a whole. And it's not just about your report, but you're aligning your business DNA in a way by which these things are really happening. That's a strong ESG report, and that's what the world wants to know from you as a reporter. Once you are here, once you've done this piece and you've answered these questions, then you start prioritizing your impact. So you know what you want to do for the different types of stakeholders, what do you want to do in a near term, medium term, and a long term to enhance your impact. You start prioritization, and then finally you act. How do you connect your overall report to the existential framework of your business and where the future is taking you to? So a very simple model again can actually be applied to any sector. But if you are able to answer some of these questions or even brainstorm with with companies, with corporates, with students, then you are preparing a workforce who knows how to write report. It's not about good English or flowery images in a report. It's about the content and the impact and the insights that are there in the report, right? So this tool actually allows you to get there. Another very important thing to keep in mind, especially when we are talking about integrated reports, and that's where most companies have moved in right now, it's an output of integrated thinking. It cannot just be the sustainability team or the EHS team, or let's say in some cases, I've even seen the HR teams writing ESG reports. There has to be an integrated thinking, and that integrated thinking has to be top driven. Each C-suite member or each of the XCOM members have to answer a certain type of question. And just being mindful of the time, I'm not going to get into the details of each question. But if tomorrow you are working with a certain type of corporate, or you're trying to influence a certain type of sector, it is important to know that the C-suite of the corporate is the first target audience to develop an organizational buy-in on the value of ESG reporting. And you have to talk to that person in a language that they understand, not a language that you like speaking on, right? So another very, very important aspect, slightly ignored aspect, I would say, for on how companies write this report, but very important to keep in mind from a long-term standpoint. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here and see if any questions are there or any thoughts that any of you would like to share before I move into the Marico piece.
One question is there from Kamal.
Yes, please.
How can the probably sin sector, such as alcohol and tobacco manufacturers, can claim to be sustainable?
How can the sin sector, such as alcohol? All right. That's a heavy word, Kamal. But then yes, sin sectors are also looking at sustainability in terms of the products that they are making. So ITC, for example, is one of the best sustainability players. So we are not questioning the ethics of the product over here, right? And we are trying to find out. So one is looking at how the reporting is being done, and the other is how the organization is trying to survive, right? So you may be involved in manufacturing a certain type of product which may or may not be. So why just alcohol and tobacco here? I mean, I might even call fast fashion as a sin sector, because it depends where you're looking at and how you're defining that sin for me. So it's about what the organization is trying to do to curb their impact. How are they defining their material issues and environmental issues? So let's say if you take up United Breweries, or if you take up ITC, as I said, for tobacco, they're some of the best sustainability players, and they're not just claiming to be sustainable. I mean, ITC is a peer company from Marico, and I've been associated with them for a long time. I know that if you actually visit some of their manufacturing facilities, they are carbon positive, they are water positive, and they have done all kinds of initiatives to actually offset some of the major environmental impacts that are being caused by their products. So we can't just blame them only because of the nature of their product, but we need to look at, isolate the two things, right? Number one, and then look at how are they, you know, quantifiably measuring their sustainability impact, and what exactly are they doing towards that. I don't know if that answers your question. We can possibly have a virtual coffee on this, because the debate can go on and on. But as I said, define what sin or non-sin is, and then try and, you know, isolate that from understanding what exactly the company is really doing. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think
Thank you.
there's some more questions. All right, Kamal, we can definitely have a conversation on this, you know, bilaterally. I think there's another question. As manufacturing sector contributes 25% emissions, how green? Very good question. Who's asked this? Trilochana. Absolutely. So, if you see, you know, the greenwash typically, in my opinion, and again, we can go on debating about this, but greenwashing typically is where the data has a lot of noise in it, right? And you're basically writing volumes of information about a small initiative that you're done, but you're not in a position to display the actual quantifiable numbers. This is one of the reasons why I said that. I was going to talk about this later on, but since you've asked me this question now, let me give you a little understanding of this. So SEBI, as you know, has had created the business reporting, the BRR, the business responsibility reporting guidelines, a few years back, and it was mandatory for the top 500 listed companies on the stock exchange to be reporting on the BRR. The BRR, classically, if you look at it, has a lot of qualitative information built into it, and that's a mandatory compliance-based disclosure. Now, given how things are, and given the fact that most companies are trying to chase their net zero commitments, India as a country has declared its net zero targets. That's where the future is, and if we have to survive, we have to head towards that. The BRSR, which is you know, an advanced version, or rather the BRR 2.0, the new framework, the business responsibility and sustainability reporting, as it's been called, that actually does not allow you to enter that much of qualitative data, but rather everything has to be quantifiable, number one. And number two, how can you validate the credibility of that data? The data has to be assured externally. So there are independent agencies who are being accredited to assure your sustainability data. And that's where, you know, even you can go on greenwashing, but the society, or I think the overall your stakeholders, will not be impacted unless you're able to give them data, and you have to show them clearly a year on year progress on what you've been doing to curb your emissions, to curb emissions in your value chain, and so on and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
I think
ma'am.
so. Okay. While preparing a new project nowadays, corporate is asking its impact on ESG. Corporate is asking its impact on ESG. What should be the right answer for governance? Ranjan, could you explain your question a little bit? I'm sorry, I'm not able to understand it.
Yeah, I'm now working in a manufacturing sector, steel sector. So
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, while we're preparing a commercial project for commercial and negotiation, while we're sending the total value to the corporate sector for negotiation of finalizing vendor,
Mm-hmm.
he is asking what is the ESG impact of this
Mm-hmm.
project. Suppose we have a modification project on ESP, so they are asking what will be its impact on ESG.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding environment, societal, we have some answers, but for governance, how will justify the answer?
Okay, good. So I have a tool. Sure. Understood your question. So environmental and social is actually, a slightly easier part of the game, if you ask me, because you know exactly what your environmental and social impacts are, whether from a product standpoint or an organization standpoint. Governance is a slightly tricky area, and that is also the reason why governance becomes a slightly difficult area to work with. But there are different ways by which you can actually track your governance issues. So this page that I had kept open because I was expecting a question like this to come in. This is the MSCI ESG industry materiality map, right? Um, Typically, when I look at governance, these are the 5 or 6 areas that are measured. So what is your corporate governance structure look like? What kind of ownership and control do you have? What is the composition of the board? And there are different questions related to the remunerations and the profile of the board overall. CEO related pay. This is the other area that is really tracked. Then accounting. What kind of independent accounting do you have on the overall compliance and governance related risks of the organization? Business ethics. This is where you talk about your anti-bribery, corruption, human rights, child labor, forced labor, modern slavery. All of this comes under business ethics, and then tax transparency. So these typically now, if you should access this tool, I will paste a link of this in the chat window as well. You can click here and you can enter your sector, whichever sector you're a part of. So let's say if I'm entering materials as a sector, it will give me the list of environmental, social, and governance issues which are applicable for the material sector. So likewise, for your own industry, this could be a good starting point for you to identify what material issues do you have on environmental and social and governance areas. Does that help?
Now it is clear, ma'am.
All right, great. Okay, let's move ahead. We'll take some more questions towards the end. This is, the part where I talk about my own organization, Marico, and how we align these 3 things, right? Purpose, profit, and responsibility. I don't think we'll have time in this presentation to talk about the report, but I've pasted a link for our company's latest report, which was released in, I think, August 2021. Do take a look at it because everything that I'll talk about in the next few slides have been actually represented in the report. So this should help you, in understanding how a manufacturing organization, a subsector of manufacturing, really, we are a classical FMCG or a consumer goods company, how they are using their strategy and their initiatives and their purpose to be able to create a report that is addressing the needs of their stakeholders. So our purpose, when I talked about a stakeholder ecosystem, this is our stakeholder ecosystem. And our purpose as an organization is to make a difference to each one of these different members of our stakeholder ecosystem, right? So our, from the purpose itself, we talk about how can we, deliver value to our stakeholders. Sorry, give me a second, and make a difference in their lives. So sorry. Now, talking about the the maturity model of where we are. So we started off with our sustainability journey sometime back in 2015. And when we started, we were basically at a phase where we started writing the different policies on the material issues, which were impacting Marico overall. Around 2017-18, we framed the first 5-year goals, and we started having KPIs on E, S, and J, and we started looping in functions like our supply chain, like HR, like finance, to be able to measure and report on the specific cross-functional KPIs. So the first 5-year roadmap was launched in 2017 and was supposed to end in 2022. The good news is that in 2021 itself, so last year itself, we've managed to actually achieve all the goals on E, S, and G, which we promised to achieve by 2022. So right now we are in the phase of creating our next set of goals, and this time it will not just be a 5-year goal, but we are looking at a decade of action roadmap, as you see over here. We're going to launch this in a few weeks from now, and this will actually focus on two things. One is how do we work with our technology team. So technology over here would actually mean your R&D, product quality, product compliance, technical regulatory affairs, consumer insights. This is your technology team and your marketing team. So how do we work with these two very, very critical functions of our organization to be able to create a sustainable product portfolio? That is what transformation would look like. And then how can we bring in an enterprise-wide transformation by 2030 through all these different things that are written over here. So that's the ESG maturity model, and we are on track in terms of where we are taking this entire journey towards. In terms of our drivers, there are 4 things that really work well for us as an organization. I showed you our purpose. Our purpose tells us to create shared value. So that's where that's the first cornerstone for success for anything and everything that we do on ESG. Secondly, stakeholder needs mapping. At the start of our first 5-year roadmap, there was a very detailed materiality assessment that was done for the organization, not just for our shareholders, but for each of those different members of our stakeholder ecosystem. We identified the material needs for each stakeholder, and we are very, very well aware on how we are responding to those needs. So if you look at our annual report, you will actually find a section where we've written what those needs are, and we've also written on what are the activities that we've done in the year to address those needs for every category of stakeholder. Very important aspect of any ESG report. Thirdly, we have a sort of a multidisciplinary approach. So the leaders, the functional leaders of Marico form something called the Sustainability Board. And that has representation from 11 different functions, all of them being very, very key functions in the organization, but they've all come together to actually decide the future of sustainability or ESG for the organization. And these are all heads of those departments. So they are the ones who are accountable for anything and everything that is done on sustainability within the organization. So this also works really well for us. And then, as I said, we put in a lot of effort to capture what is happening in the market, what our peers globally and in India are doing really well, and how could we use some of those lessons learned to be able to design our journey better. So these are some of the key drivers. We've also done, so I talked to you about the stakeholder needs, right? Pardon me. I talked to you about the stakeholder needs. So we've identified what are the different types of stakeholder needs for each different stakeholder. And then these responses that we've written over here, whether it's for a regulator, investor, consumer, this is exactly what are the different sections of my ESG report. So we've identified the needs and we've put together our responses. And using these two things together, we've actually structured our ESG report. So we are directly addressing what question or what topic, say, a regulator wants to hear, right? So this will again give you some understanding on how we, as an industry, how we are responding to our stakeholders' voices and needs. Then we've created something called the ESG footprint. Now, this is, as you see, is a laundry list of more than 50 KPIs. All these 50 KPIs are measurable, number one. This cannot be greenwashed because the data that will be published on each of these will be quantifiable data on what has the company been doing, let's say on occupational health and safety for the last 5 years across our operational units, across our value chain. So each of these are measurable KPIs, and there are annual action plans that are available for every business unit, every geography, which helps us in tracking, in managing these KPIs, and also disclose on them on an annual basis. Just to give you a flavor of how we do this. So these are the different geographies on which, so there's India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Egypt. And we've actually created a roadmap, right, based on these three phases. So the first phase, which I talked to you about, the phase that India has already completed, was the policy creation phase. The second phase, some of the other geographies are slightly behind. So let's say for Bangladesh, Marico, Bangladesh, we are in the process of creating their, policies and identify their ESG footprint for them. Whereas for India, we are already at a phase where our measurable KPIs are already there. We are at a business integration phase where the different functions have adopted the aspect of sustainability that is material to their function, and they have started working on it. So using these four maturity-based phases, we've tried to create a roadmap or a maturity journey for each of the business units on ESG. This is the disclosure journey. So these are the different reports that Marico has launched. We respond to the GRI framework, to the IR framework. We will be voluntarily responding to BRSR this year. We've been responding to CDP. And of course, we have each of our material goals aligned with the SDGs, right? Recently, in July last year, Marico was ranked as the highest amongst FMCG companies in ESG reporting by CRISIL. And just to give you a little understanding of why this happened. So how is it that we're able to retain this kind of a position? CRISIL doesn't have any voluntary disclosure or a questionnaire that they send to us and we have to fill it up and then they give us a score. No, they only use the data that is available in our annual reports or the publicly available information, and then they rank companies accordingly. I think one important thing that we've been doing in our reports is the connectedness of information. You cannot talk about your brand campaigns or your marketing, responsible marketing campaigns without talking about social value creation. So somewhere the purpose of your brands need to lead to what kind of strategic CSR efforts are you adopting? How your brand, so let's say for us, the Nihar Naturals brand has an entire CSR initiative on Nihar Shanti Pathshala Fanwala, which is a education program where we are trying to improve the literacy levels of students and teachers from underprivileged schools and areas in India. So the connectedness of information where you look at CSR, you look at sustainable brands, you look at manufacturing footprint, you look at emissions. You cannot talk about sustainable packaging projects without measuring the overall reduction in your carbon emissions footprint that is happening because you have switched to, say, a bamboo-based packaging, right? So this connectedness of information is very, very important in a manufacturing sector's ESG report. The strategic focus of the organization needs to be very clear, and you also need to be very futuristic in how you write your report. You have to talk about what lies ahead of you, what you see as coming. May not be all great things, but you still have to be aware of how climate change may completely devastate, some of our coconut farms that are there in the southern part of the country because of cyclones. And then talk about what kind of risk mitigation techniques do you have? What kind of disaster management plans do you have? All of this information needs to come out in your reports, right? I think another very important aspect that we're still working on is the conciseness of your report. Most annual reports at this point of time are at least 200-page plus, but I've spoken to at least 30 investors myself, and they do not appreciate reading a 30-page report for maybe the 30,000 companies whose data they need to analyze. So how can you make your report readable? Snackable is the word that I prefer using over here, and reliable. How can people trust the data that you're publishing in your annual report is very, very important. And these are some of the areas that we really, really focus on when it comes to ESG reporting. So that's a little bit about Marico, and I've come towards the end of the presentation, but I'm very open to hearing from you a little more about what you think and whether that 9 that Professor Singh started with has somewhere become a 10 or not, based on what we've talked about so far. So do take a look at our report. Before I move into this section, do take a look at our report and try to understand what I tried to mention and maybe correlate on how a particular strategy that we've adopted, how has that actually been represented in the report. I think you'll find it useful. Talking about ESG, India's ESG future, carving out that story, are we able to spot where the opportunity windows are, right? So I was going to talk about the BRSR. I've created a little timeline for you over here, as you see. And in that timeline, what we've seen is 2009 was when, the first voluntary guidelines were framed by the MCA. And standing at 2020, the BRSR was launched. So every year there was a change in how the government or compliance was asking for ESG data to be reported by companies. And where we reached last year has definitely pushed companies to start reporting quality and credible data on ESG in the public domain, right? So you've also seen a little comparison over here with the developed geographies. If you see in 2009, India just had about 20 sustainability reports, whereas in 2020, while the canvas has become a lot more complex, there are more than 700 sustainability reports that have been published. So I think somewhere the favorable policy environment, the changes in the demands from the regulators on how complex and how deep-seated disclosure can you do on ESG data is definitely pushing companies in the right in setting their right foot forward. Now, this is the question that I have for you, and I would love some answers over here. If you are, let's say, a manufacturing company and you would like to be future ready, after everything that you've heard me say, what do you think a company should be focusing on in its ESG reporting journey? Any, top of the mind thoughts? You guys as well over here. What do you think are some of the, absolute must-haves, non-negotiables that companies need to keep in mind when they are planning to write their ESG report?
I think one is the climate change and second is the biodiversity risk.
Absolutely.
Given the corona scenario, which nobody would have thought about originally,
Absolutely.
I guess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're talking about material issues which are futuristic in nature and which are not just impacting our own organization, but which are impacting the entire ecosystem altogether. How could you report on material issues which are not just related to, your own organization's periphery? Absolutely right. Anything else?
Reduction of freshwater usage and reuse of water.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that in Marico, we use a concept called, blue water, green water, and gray water. So green water is where rainwater harvesting can actually be done to reduce your consumption of blue water. That's the fresh water. And also how your gray water, which is your treated water, how do you have different, ways by which you're able to recycle your gray water and again use that to reduce your consumption of blue water. Absolutely. Very important that we start focusing on water.
Conservation, energy conservation, utilize solar energy.
Sure. Renewables. So transitioning to renewables, I think that's really, the step zero of any organization's net zero strategy. And you cannot only think about curbing your emissions because manufacturing functions will obviously keep increasing. It's a sector that cannot slow down, right? So the sector will keep on increasing, but the way you can reduce your footprint is by transitioning to cleaner fuel, to renewable energy. So absolutely right. And I think companies are talking about that a lot. If you look at the net zero commitments that are coming out, most companies are talking about how they're transitioning to renewables or they're transitioning to carbon neutral operations. That is really defining the future. Okay, anyone else? I'm just mindful of the time, so let me quickly go through the points that I had in mind for you. So, the first thing that I think needs to be done is shift your portfolio to business models that have a lower carbon footprint. I think Dr. Sharma mentioned about renewables. Absolutely. Invest in portfolios which have a low carbon future. That's the first thing that needs to be done. Bring the S in ESG to the forefront. You will see a lot of the ESG reports are still sort of hovering around the E part of it. As I think one of you pointed out earlier, governance is it's almost seen like a foreign area. So governance is still a little difficult to take up. But the S part typically gets hidden between E and G. So how can you bring the S part of it to the forefront and start talking about more on the social value creation piece? I think that is very important. Product benefits and responsible product campaigns. By this, what I mean is start investing your marketing spends in creating in talking about the sustainability benefits of your product. Again, when I say sustainability benefits, the environment benefits, the social benefits, let's say if your product while preparation of the product you were able to create x number of jobs for the marginalized or the underprivileged community, those kind of things need to be part of the product campaign. So that's where it becomes a responsible product campaign. So how can you talk more about those kinds of things? Make consumers a part of your sustainability story, either in terms of how you are picking up their insights, how you really are hearing the voices of the consumers in creating your sustainability strategy, or even how, like in the in the West, in the US, for example, products would typically have a little label over here, which is like a QR code. If you scan that, the product will that on your phone, you can actually see what's the best way of recycling your product. And if you don't recycle it that way, then the parent company will actually not be able to put it to a better use after end of life. So you're actually assigning a certain part of the work on sustainability to the consumers, right? So how can you move towards that? And trust me, this is not just a foreign Western concept. These things are happening in India, and Marico itself has been, being an Indian company, we're trying to find out ways by which we can engage our consumers more in our overall sustainability story. And that's very, very important. Create brand ambassadors across the value chain. It cannot be a team of 4 sustainability managers in a company or the CSO of the company who's only talking about the organization's sustainability impact. You need to have brand ambassadors across your organization hierarchy and even within your value chain. Your suppliers, your employees, the contractual workforce who are working in your organization. Everyone should know the story, and they should be able to tell the story very proudly because they are a part of how that story has been written, right? So that's one way by which you can actually create a incremental impact on sustainability. I think I've spoken volumes about this already. How can you publish credible and measurable data that is externally assured? There are a lot of
Thank you.
investors
Same to
who
you. Thank you. Same to you. Thank you. Same to
there are a lot of investors who are only looking at externally assured data. We will not look at your data if it's not assured by an agency that is accredited. So it's important to get data externally assured. And then, use all these different types of sustainability disclosure frameworks or ESG disclosure frameworks to create your own framework. Analyze all those questions and create a sort of a disclosure structure for yourself so that tomorrow when you come up with a report, you don't have to have individual reports for every framework, but it will be one report which would have addressed the requirements of all these different types of rating agencies and disclosure standards. I think that is very, very important because trust me, we are just at the tip of the iceberg, and what lies below is what we typically miss in ESG, and this is the part that is material. This is you have to measure and you have to report what matters, right? That's all. Thank you so much. In the words of our friend Mr. Mark Twain, we have to plan for the future because that's where we are going to be for the rest of our lives. I have talked a lot and I've talked 6 or 16 minutes more than what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to stop here and ask any questions, any thoughts that you may have.
Ma'am, in the league of Marico, there is a company startup named Amal Farms, actually in agriculture. It is also working in the traceability of product, like the product which they are procuring from the farmers. They even give you an insight like from where they are, who is actually producing that.
Yes.
And recently they won this FICCI startup award also.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So Marico has actually started acquiring a lot of these digital brands, right? Specifically the ones that recently there's another one called Just Herbs. I don't know if you've seen it. Just Herbs, the promise is that for every product that you buy, there'll be a tree that will be, planted in the name of the consumer. And the consumer actually gets a live report where there is a tracking, a Google Map link which is added in that certificate. And if someone actually wants, they can track that tree that is being planted. So I think, digital commerce is becoming the future of FMCG as a sector. And brands like or companies like Marico have started investing a lot over there because that's where you may not be able to change a traditional product like, say, a parachute coconut oil, which has been a kind of product all this way. To make it a sustainable product will take a lot of time. Rather, if you are willing to expand, it's important that you invest in brands that are actually, illustrating and demonstrating that story of sustainability for you. Any other questions?
Hi, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, there's a thing that is eco-labeling on food products. That is, I mean, really gaining attention in the European and the world of West.
Correct.
So, what do you think when it will be become like normalized in India or the subcontinental parts?
So, Kamil, it's a slightly sad story over here. So, in 1991, India actually was one of the first countries to have its own eco label. That eco label was called Eco Mark Scheme, and it was applicable for 12 sectors. Okay, but what happened was because we tried to use a one size fits all sort of an approach, I think that eco label was only live for maybe less than a decade, and then it fell off the tracks because it was not able to be applied for different types of products and be customized for that product or for that sector. So right now, what many companies are doing is there are eco labels. So there are three types of eco labels. Maybe some point of time we can do a session on that as well. There's type 1, type 2, and type 3 eco-label. Type 1 eco-label is where you use a single aspect of your product, mostly environmental, and there are external eco-labels that you can apply. Indian companies have started looking at, some of these external type 1 eco-labels, which are very commonly being used by either if you are a supplier, if you're an MSME and you're supplying, let's say, to a Unilever or to a P&G or even to a Marico, and if they have taken up, let's say, Forest Stewardship Council eco-label, right, for all their packaging related materials, then you are also either asked by the corporate to take up that eco-label. So you're part of that process of, having that kind of eco-label as part of the value chain, or you may just be interested to do better business with that corporate. You may want to adopt that eco-label. So there are a group of 21 eco-labels. Maybe you'll easily find it on the web, which Indian manufacturing companies are actually using. These are all type 1 eco-labels like FSC, like MSC, Marine Stewardship Council. There's something called Rainforest Alliance Agricultural Standard, or RAS, that is being used. There some companies like Marico who uses a lot of soya. There is something on responsible soya. There's responsible palm oil. So there are different types of product specific eco-labels which are being picked up by Indian companies. There's also a type 2 eco-label, which is a self-declared eco-label. So many companies are actually coming up, like if you take up a body shop product, you would see that body shop has its own eco-label to say that none of those products have been tested on animals. So I think now they've got the Leaping Bunny certification, which is a cruelty-free eco-label. But initially when they started, all body shop cosmetics will have a line written over there that we claim that none of the products are tested on animals. So it's a cruelty-free product. So those are type 2 self-declared eco-labels that you can go for. So I think there are lots of options, Kamal, which are coming up in India. Like Manavendra mentioned, there are a lot of these digital brands, e-com brands who are going for these kinds of eco-labels more, because that's really going to decide the future of their business. They need a parallel vehicle. They can't walk the same steps as a traditional Marico or a Unilever would have walked, right? So for that parallel vehicle of growth, I think they are leveraging on these, pillars of sustainability a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Can you just give me a rough idea that what is the future of eco-labeling? I mean, when will these companies or the people will take it seriously? I mean, seriously regulate and.
So there are a lot of companies who started using eco-labels. You pick up any, Unilever, Hindustan Unilever product, or you pick up, let's say, a Nestle or a Procter & Gamble related product, you'll definitely find eco-labels. The startup world or the digital commerce, as I said, some of these specific brands which are working on, like just yesterday, I happened to, on Amazon, there are in fact some specific products, food products, which are going for organic certification. So the other day, I purchased a bottle of honey. It says wild organic honey, and there are 7 certifications that startup company has actually got to be able to certify the purity of honey, right? So it's already there, Kamil. We are not waiting for anything over here. I think for the larger companies, it's going to take a little time, because you can't all of a sudden say that, let's say a bottle of Ariel liquid that you use for your washing your clothes is sustainable. So all of a sudden we can't switch over there, but I think it's the path that one has to take. So I'll give you an example for Marico, the Parachute coconut oil, our signature product. We are trying to get 2 eco labels for it, which certifies the authenticity of the, or rather, which certifies how we are sustainably sourcing the coconuts that are being used for the Parachute coconut oil. And that should come within a year or something. So there's a huge I mean, maybe if you share your email ID with me, in my consulting days, I did a huge research on eco-labels. I would love to share that report with you, where we studied about 164 eco-labels and we tried to come out what is it that the future looks like in terms of uptake of these eco-labels by corporates.
Sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. I would like to get connected with you. So, obviously, can I have your email ID, or maybe I can?
It's
both
yeah, I will send you guys the deck that I just presented at the last slide. My email ID is present. You can surely write to me.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for your valuable insights.
Thank you so much.
So, dear participants, tomorrow we will be having our last session and the last day. We will be having a last session tomorrow in the first half, and then we will have an examination. So we'll meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock.